nearby place. I can't remember, what was the name of that? There's a special park there in New Haven, famous park.
Yeah, it's been decades since I've been there.
Yeah, well, what he was saying is that there's a reason why Yale is a king-making site in America. There's a reason why American presidents go to Yale.
Yeah.
Why the titans of industry go to Yale.
Work.
It's because of the geology of Yale.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense. You get certain areas environmentally that are conducive to, should we say, mental abilities processes. And I could easily see that in terms of New Haven.
Very interesting, because it should suggest that when they're picking the locations of some of these early American sites, Yale dates back to the 17th century, 18th
right,
century.
Exactly.
That they knew.
They knew, and was it on a conscious level or was it on a subconscious level? Either way, I think they knew something. They were sensing something. And see, I think the same principles apply to the classical ancient sites. I believe in most cases it applies to, for instance, in Europe, sites for cathedrals, that type of thing, holy sacred sites. You're picking up something at those spots.
And what we need to do is just go there with an open heart, an open mind, and be able to kind of tap in. Those stones still speak to us. I've had the experience in Egypt and elsewhere of the stones speaking, and it's real.
It absolutely is real. I mean, I think once people experience it, and you know that firsthand, once people experience it, there's no denying it.
Robert, we've come up to a break here. When we get back, let's talk about a century of research and experiments into paranormal abilities and what it's brought us. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Dr. Robert Schoch. Dr. Schoch, are you a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, or were you a skeptic, I should say, because it sounds like you've opened up to it considerably. And what's been the result of your immersion in this field of study?
Well, I'd like to think of myself as always a skeptic, but as a skeptic with a little s, not someone who's a debunker, not someone who throws the term skeptic around as if, it's some kind of grand title and they're going to disprove everyone. I think what we need to do, and I think everyone should do this, is, really be open to things, but that means be open to both sides of things. So really look at things critically. Don't, buy everything you hear, everything that everyone says to you, but on the other hand, don't dismiss things when there's good evidence for them. So that's how I define myself as a skeptic. Sometimes I use the term true skeptic. But I think it's important to distinguish between that and the debunkers of the world, skeptics with a capital S.
And we all know that you've been subjected to the ploys of the debunkers and the true skeptics.
Absolutely. I mean, they're all over, and they want to make your life miserable.
And you're such a nice guy. How could anybody want to make your life miserable?
It's horrible. It's horrible. I really try to go into this with an open mind. And an open mind means, looking at both sides of things and not being afraid to follow evidence where it leads. So when anyone presents me with new information or a new site or a new experience that they've had, I immediately question it in my own mind, if not up front with them. And I look into it. And one thing that I've found, and very important to me as a natural scientist, because I am trained as a scientist and I'm trained as a field scientist, that's what I mean by natural scientist, is to look at cases. So when someone starts describing experience to me that they've had, and it fits right in with the pattern of similar experiences, I have little doubt about it. On the other hand, there are certain things when people are, I hate to say it crudely, lying to you because they're describing something that makes absolutely no sense in the bigger picture, does not fit what we know about the subject matter. So in some cases you get, doesn't mean they're absolutely wrong, but in some cases you get a funny sense right away, and your skepticism goes up rather than down.
There it is, that extra sense that is putting up the signal. Let's walk for a second here before we run. What abilities are considered paranormal? Okay,
I consider paranormal, when I discuss paranormal, I usually use it in a strict, or we could call it academic sense. So the classic paranormal ability would be telepathy, or sometimes people the old-fashioned term for it is thought transference, mind-to-mind interactions without any kind of intermediary, not using the typical known senses. That's sort of classic paranormal or topic of parapsychology. And that is absolutely, in my opinion, is the best validated. I mean, it's very clear that it's real and has been demonstrated both in field studies and in many laboratory studies that telepathy is real. So that's classic. Other classic paranormal is what's known as psychokinesis or PK, essentially mind over matter. And that is much more controversial even among people who study such things. But I believe that there's good evidence for it both in laboratory-type settings. For instance, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research laboratories for over a quarter century did many studies in what we call micro-PK, looking at the influence of mind on systems, many of which were subatomic or at the atomic molecular level, and how they could be influenced by simple consciousness, by simple mental concentration.
I thought it was interesting that in the book you went back and pulled in some studies from the late 1800s, well before the idea of the quantum was expressed, before in today's quantum entanglement, but yet they all seem to be kind of aiming at that and indirectly or sometimes even directly inferring that they had some kind of knowledge of that.
Exactly. In fact, I mean, one thing I found in researching this book and putting together the anthology is that some incredible work in the field was done in the late 1800s, in the late 19th century. I mean, you had some of the best minds in the world, literally, tackling what we now call the paranormal, or what we now call parapsychology. And part of it, I think, was in that milieu, there wasn't as much stigma associated with the topic as there is now. So you could have Nobel Prize-winning physicists 100 years ago talking about the paranormal, studying the paranormal, and coming to what in hindsight are some amazingly modern conclusions.
Yeah, it's incredible. And then all of a sudden we have this explosion after Einstein's theory of relativity. It's like the imagination suddenly was expanded, and all of a sudden we start to realize as the consequence that hey, we might be embedded in like a common psychical environment, like a collective mind, a thought bubble. What do you think about that?
Yeah, exactly. I think we definitely are. I mean, I think all the evidence clearly indicates that we are. There's a, the collective consciousness is sometimes the term is used, sort of a Jungian sense. That's real. That's not just a metaphor. That's not just myth. It's not just a literary way of saying that we all are related to each other. I mean, literally, and this gets back to telepathy, literally what goes on in one person's mind affects things. It affects other people. I was just talking about psychokinesis. I mean, mental processes can affect material at some level. I was going to say the other two aspects of psychokinesis that I think are very well documented in certain cases, and you have to be careful that there's always fraud in all of this. There's always cases of fraud, but that's with any science. There are cases of fraud. But what's sometimes known as, for instance, healing at a distance, or the direct mental processes affecting other living systems, that's very well documented now, too. That sort of borders between telepathy and psychokinesis. And many, many controlled studies, even done by skeptics, arch skeptics with a capital S, have demonstrated that something like that occurs. You can hook up, you mentioned before, plants. Cleve Baxter, the polygraph expert, has done amazing studies going back decades now where he stumbled upon this. He hooked up his polygraphs, lie detectors, to plants, and then realized he wasn't trying to do this. He was trying to look at other things. He realized that his thoughts and intentions were being recorded, were being picked up by the polygraphs, or were being indicated on the polygraphs that were hooked up to the plants. The plants were essentially picking up his thoughts.
The Secret Life of Plants. I love that.
Exactly.